And today's social media breakfast is brought to you by Auto Media Group, as well as the Small Business Development Center, Region 9 Development Commission, and Minnesota State University's Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And we put on these social media breakfasts every second Friday of the month, usually on topics related specifically to social media, but also digital marketing. Today, we have a panel of different agency employees / freelancers that are going to help you kind of understand how better to work with an agency or a freelancer within your business or organization. So what that means is, it's not the same as just hiring an employee, right? It's a third-party marketing service. So it works a little bit differently than just having someone that acts as your direct report. And so hopefully you can gain some value from that. But we're going to start out with intros, and then we're going to go down the line and maybe tell one anecdotal story or tip or experience that we've had as agency or freelancers that we think you might be able to draw value from. And then the whole session is going to be very Q&A based. So we have a lighter turnout today, but it would still be great if you guys could get some questions ready. And I'd prefer to start with things that are related to how to work with an agency, but if that topic starts to get stale, we can then move into some other marketing topics and questions, as well as if you guys have anything specific to the virus and all that's going on. I don't know how much I can help you, but we will take our best stab at it. So for intros, Matthias, do you want to start?
Sure. My name is Matthias Sliver. I'm the bulk of my work is in web design up in the Auto Media Group office, but I do copywriting, voiceover work. What else do I do?
Writing.
I said that. Okay.
Did you?
Yeah. So I've been up there for a year and a half now, and I do a lot of projects with Auto Media Group. They're great to work with, and yeah, I don't know. That's about it. That covers it. We'll get more in depth. We'll get to know each other.
You should go into your background as far as previous.
So before I went freelance, I was up at the Taylor Corporation, 2 different companies up there, and then I just kind of got bored with the whole corporate gig, and I just sort of jumped out, much to the chagrin of my pregnant wife and small child at home. But I haven't really looked back, and it's been really wonderful working as a freelancer and just kind of setting your own hours, setting your own rules, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I don't know. Good enough, Wes?
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. We're doing intros, actually.
Okay.
Yep.
We're good.
Yeah.
Okay. Ashley Flitter. I apologize for my tardiness this morning. I forgot my kids did not have school, so that was fun. So I work for Breakthrough Digital, an agency out of the cities, and before that I was freelance as well. So I've kind of run the gamut of digital marketing, kind of overseeing projects, but also kind of being hands-on with email marketing and paid media, kind of anything you can think of from the digital marketing space. So.
And I'm Mike, co-partner, co-founder of Auto Media Group with Wes here. I'm also the creative director of Auto Media Group, so kind of anything in the creative space, everything from the first client interaction, planning process, all the way through to the creation of the content. My background is in graphic design, and so that's kind of where my core offering is, basically, and we've kind of evolved our video talents and skill set over the past few years with kind of the big need for video in the market, so I've kind of filled that role as well, so wearing many hats, but yeah, it's great.
Yeah. And Wes Auto Media Group, I handle the business strategy and everything kind of. Mike and I like to put it right brain, left brain. So he's right brain, creative side of the business, and I'm left brain, strategy and all that kind of good stuff. So we started the business in 2016 and have been growing pretty steadily ever since. And as you notice from this group, it might have been a little bit confusing if you read the event marketing, but there's an agency, which is Mike and I, but then there's also another agency employee, which is Ashley, but for a different agency, and then a freelancer. But yet we all work together on a lot of projects. So that's just an important distinction for how we operate, but then also how to think about some of our answers and some of our perspective throughout this panel. So, but my experience started out with small business. So my family owns Zan's Mexican restaurant in town. And so from that perspective, I really got the nitty-gritty day-to-day kind of operation side of things. And then Mike and I launched in 2016, like I said, and have learned how to run an agency. While we might have had marketing skills before, we've been building it in that sense ever since then. So it's been a good experience. But like I said before, the next piece we just want to go through and maybe give you a story or a tip that we've experienced before we open it up into Q&A. I'll kick that off if that's cool with you guys, and then we'll just go down the line. But mine is boring. I'm going to start with budgeting, but it's also super important for a lot of businesses. So, it's interesting. You'll sit down. I handle a lot of client interactions with consultations or initial business development type meetings. And budgeting is usually one of the main topics at some point during that meeting, right? Everyone wants to know, what is the price of the service that I'm asking for? And there's a couple of components to that. So number one, there's whatever the agency charges for it. But number two, there's what does your budget allow for? And even beyond that, there's a third part, which is what you're asking for even really what you need? And so all of that hopefully can get answered in that first meeting so that we've got a very clear idea of how to move forward based on that initial conversation. But one of the common things that's done by small to medium-sized businesses is they haven't gone through every area of marketing and experienced, let's say, a rebrand, or maybe they haven't done a major video campaign. So it's common that they might not have a budget for that particular type of a project because they haven't gone through it. And that's understandable. And a lot of times we get questions related to, well, I don't know what this would cost. You tell me what my budget should be. And that's fine. That's an acceptable path to go down. But realize that, the agency or the freelancer might have different prices based on what your needs are, based on where they're located, based on how many people they're bringing in as resources on that particular project. So budgets can vary greatly if you leave it up, especially to the agency to evaluate your needs. At the same time, if you come into a meeting and you say, here's what I have available to put towards this project, I don't know if that's an accurate amount for this type of project, but I'd like to be transparent and work with you, hopefully somewhere near this budget. That gives an agency or a freelancer a lot better idea of, okay, here's the parameters that I need to get this particular deliverable within, and can a lot of times lead to a more successful transaction as opposed to having an agency, to a certain extent, throw either a larger project than you might need or a smaller project than what you were expecting as a client, and a price point that fits either of those scenarios. And so that budgeting piece, while it might always seem like something that isn't in your realm of knowledge, can really be helpful when you're working with a third-party marketer, because it just gives us a better idea of what that scope might be.
So my story kind of curtails a tiny bit off of budgeting, but it's not so much the technical actual budget itself. It's kind of an extreme story. Wes had asked to kind of maybe come up with a story, and mine is kind of like a what not to do when working with an agency, and I kind of have a story from back, and it's kind of an extreme example. I kind of like extreme examples just to kind of show, but as far as working with an agency and kind of things that you can do on your end to help batch work, to keep things organized and be mindful of everyone's time involved. And so we were working with a client about a year back, and it was new on. You're already smiling because it was early on in the process, so we were excited to have the client and everything like that. They had a low budget, so we worked with them on that and went back and forth with that and negotiated with them. And then because of their creative process, or I should say their revisions process, it went past a lot of people. And so you get revisions from 5 different people, and all those revisions would come to me. And it kind of came to a head one day where, and I was working on 3 different things, and the contact at this company started calling me for every comma she found on this. We were almost to the end of this project, and it was a document with a lot of text, and she oh, I found another word, and then she said, okay, I'll make that change and I'll send it back. And then I counted, and I was doing, I didn't really realize it was happening at the time, but afterwards I realized that she had called me 9 times in the span of 3 hours to bring up a word, or like, and they were very like picky on things like, can we move that over an inch type thing. And so afterwards it really helped Wes and I kind of realize, okay, definitely as far as putting your foot down with, it was just a good conversation for us to have, is how can we stop this from happening again, and being clear and transparent in the initial planning process, and also with our budgeting side of it, and how we want to approach projects like that. And I know that's an extreme example, but I think it's just kind of a lesson in being mindful of when you're working with an agency or any freelance or anything like that, just kind of being mindful of their time and know that they have a lot of things going on, and they have other clients and stuff like that. And if they're really good at their job, they're going to make you feel like you're their only client. And we definitely did our best to be professional and give them what they wanted. But it brought up a really good point for us that agencies at the same time have to kind of put their foot down on certain things and just be mindful of their time.
Well, and imagine the inefficiencies to extrapolate on that for the client side. I mean, they have
Right.
to pick up the phone, call, bring you to a specific part of the project again, explain that problem. It's just a tiny problem, hang up, reevaluate,
Right.
do it again and again and again. That's not efficient for the client either. And so it was just kind of a nightmare of a situation. I remember coming in, I hadn't been around the office, and Mike looked like he'd been pulling his hair out when I came into the office. I go, "What's up? You seem agitated." He goes, "Oh, you have no idea."
Well, the client had even started to call I didn't answer at the end because they were calling the business line, and I was doing something, and she ended up calling my personal phone. And so it was getting to this ridiculous level, which I don't know how she got that number in the first place, but so yeah, that's kind of my extreme scenario. But
So I don't know if it's question or answer time yet, but what was your solution to that?
well,
How did-
so it's tough because every client's process is different. Like this one, it was very specific. It was very different in that it wasn't just one person making revisions. It was a bunch of people kind of coming through, and it was all just kind of coming through at the same time. And it happened to be this last person, our main contact at the end, that was kind of nitpicking it herself. But one solution we have is very upfront with the contract process, and having disclaimers in there and saying this is the set amount of hours, if it goes over this amount, this much. So just having it in writing, just kind of your strict guidelines, and there's always going to be give and take, but it's kind of just trying to be upfront with most of it.
Yeah.
Well, and to expand on that one more time too is, so Mike mentioned batching, and so a lot of times if we know that we need a lot of different content, whether it's photos or written content, whatever it might be, we try and streamline that into one content session. And similarly, if you have a bunch of revisions, here's a batch of revisions. And so we had tried then with future projects with that client to put in a revisions clause and say, we will give you 3 proofs of this project. So each time you have a chance within those 3 proofs to get a finished product if you like it enough, and if you want more revisions, you've got 2 more proofs, and if you want more revisions, you've got 1 more proof, and so on and so forth. But the client said that wasn't a good use of, yeah. So
Of
the
their
client wasn't a
resources.
fan of that process, and so that's where you have to realize that maybe it's not the best fit between you and that client, and that's the ultimate result there. We ended up walking away from that one just because it wasn't the same process. So.
Yeah, and I mean, so the biggest thing I think when you're working with an agency, especially if you haven't done so before, is being really clear, upfront, and communicative and transparent. So I find that from the agency side, it always helps. I mean, to Mike's point, it always helps to be very clear up front with your expectations for the client, but then to also be really clear about what they can expect from you. So very often we kind of lay out our process as well as what we expect from the client right away. Even sometimes in a pitch, we'll actually talk about our internal process so that they understand, that we have rigor around how we communicate. We send status reports every week. We the way that we take in requests as well. We're very clear about, you can email us or you can call us, but just know that that doesn't always mean that we're going to do it right away. We're very upfront about how we approach revisions and how we approach the project timeline. And we've also found that to be very helpful upfront to kind of lay out, these are all the deliverables of the project. This is the timeline that you can expect. From a client standpoint, we set out the expectation that if something is going to be delivered to them, let's say on a Monday, and we expect revisions by Friday in order for us to meet the rest of the timeline, we're really clear in the contracting, so you can kind of see how everything is really linked together from the outset. So, from the contracting standpoint, we're really clear that if they're not upholding their end of the bargain, that our timelines will also be pushed out. I kind of have a similar story. We had a really big client. They were doing a new website migration, and so they were taking all this content from their old site and moving it to their new site, and they wanted to make revisions to it along the way. So we had done probably 120 pages of content, sent it to the client. They reviewed 6 pages in the amount of time that they were supposed to, and then still had the expectation that we were going to have revisions done the next day on all of it. And it really pushed the entire timeline back, and they were continuing to push on us that, it didn't make sense. This was the original timeline. But having that in the contracting and having those status reports every week to look back and say, this is where we said we were at with progress, this is what we said we needed from you. It also helps that documentation standpoint so that everybody's always on the same page. If you need to, there's a discrepancy between things, you have sort of the paper trail to make sure that everybody's working together toward that common goal. And I think that's the big piece. Sometimes I think when people come into work with an agency, they already feel like they're sort of not being taken advantage of, but they want to make sure that they get their money's worth out of that interaction, right? That's everybody's kind of common goal is, this is my budget, and every business is different, and you have a budget, and it's likely significant for you, right? So whether it's a $100,000 project or a $5,000 project, whoever that company is, it's likely a significant investment for them. And so no matter the size of the client, it's important to keep that same rigor so that they feel like they're not sort of backed up against a wall, right? That doesn't lead to a good partnership. And we found that partnerships where either side feels that way just doesn't go anywhere, and the quality of work tends to suffer. So feeling like it's more of a partnership or an extension of your team is really, I feel like, the best way to approach working with an agency.
Yeah, I don't think I can really add much, to be honest. I mean, I don't obviously work for an agency. I do work with Auto Media Group, and I've done work with Ashley and Breakthrough as well. But I guess from a freelancer standpoint, I pretty much do everything wrong. I'm a really bad freelancer. I never have I rarely use documentation. I always, punish myself by giving these clients way too many edits and stuff. And I think there's actually something, decent to be learned from that, because if you can see that you're doing this to a freelancer, and I'm a huge pushover, honestly. When I get to work with somebody and they're like, hey, could you pick up my dry cleaning? I'd be like, yeah, I guess. I mean, we could probably work something out here. But if you kind of feel that your relationship with your freelancer is going in that direction, it's probably not great either. So it's a good way to kind of put a mental check on yourself and be like, is this guy is he a good fit for me, or does he know what he's doing? I do know what I'm doing. I'm just a big pushover. Does he know what he's doing? Is this going to result in a a good relationship down the road? Am I going to want to continue working with him? So I really don't feel like I can add much to what they said, because they really put documentation together, have clear expectations, be communicative. Those are all super important, or else you'll get steamrolled like me.
What about like how do you manage a relationship? Because I've seen other people and some very successful people who are very light on documentation,
Mm-hmm.
but they do it by more through like their personality, through the way that they like manage their relationship. Not all the relationship needs to be, especially in like very large projects, grounded in like say contractual work, contractual obligations and clauses. But I do know there are many successful people who are very light on documentation.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how do you actually manage your relationship with the clients? Just more on the.
Yeah, that's good, and that's when I say I get steamrolled. That's really what I mean, is that I'm way more relationship based. I don't put a lot of things in writing, maybe a light contract or something like that, but I genuinely enjoy having a face-to-face conversation and just kind of working with somebody. I like working with clients who kind of just get it, who know what's going on. I've got a client right now I'm doing a website for her. We literally like pass in the hallway and she's like, hey, my website kind of sucks, can you do a new website for me? And I was like, yeah. She's like, how much is it going to cost? And I gave her the number and she's like, okay, yeah, do that. And I was like, all right. So now I'm working on it. And I mean, granted, she's in the same building as us, so I can go down and talk to her and all this stuff. But that's the kind of stuff. Those are the kind of clients I like to work with. Now, I have had a couple where I'm like, man, I kind of wish I would have put some kind of like max meeting, or max revisions in here, because like Mike's story, they were pushing for very small changes coming up, every week, and being like, can we move this a little bit? And I'm like, okay, yep, we can do it. And I mean, the client was very kind, and I don't hold any ill will against her or anything, but it is nice to have sort of a barrier. But yeah, to your point, Kurt, I'm a relationship guy. That's kind of how I like to do it. But they would probably swear by contractual stuff.
Well, I would actually agree with you that I think the relationship part is important, and I think that it's important to even before you start working together to make sure that it seems like the right fit. Well, a lot of agencies probably that sort of take the other route where they, money is money kind of situation, and they'll take kind of any job. But I definitely think that the projects go better and people feel better about the exchange when you're able to establish early on if it's the right fit. And I've definitely walked away from work before because I could tell that they were going to be the type of person that wanted to have a lot of these, revisions and meetings, and were very kind of focused on what we felt were maybe the wrong things. And that's not to say that person is wrong, but it's not going to be the right fit for how we operate. And I think establishing that early on can prevent some of that. Although I will say that you can't always see that ahead of time, and sometimes you get into situations where you didn't really see it coming, and I think you deal with it then. But I agree that even through a lot of the contracting and stuff, the relationship piece is still very important just to the success of the work. So.
I did have another anecdote about that. I just the other day I had a call with a very small company in Belgium about doing web design work, and I'm trying to phrase this right without using numbers too much, but for what I would charge for like a website, they were essentially they wanted to keep their expenses. They wanted to have a custom designed website, like go into Adobe XD or Sketch or Illustrator, design a website, ship it to a code farm, and have it back to the client in 5 days for what I would take probably like 4 to 6 weeks to do. And so they asked me to do some designing for them, just static designs for them. And I said, about about a fifth of the budget is what I said like it would cost me to do the designs for them, and they were like abhorred by that number. They were just like, what? Like, that's crazy. I'm like, well, listen, this is what I'm charging for just general run-of-the-mill websites around here, and you guys are asking to do a 5-day turnaround on a custom like WordPress build. And it's like that relationship right there, you can already tell it's just going to suck, because they're going to be hammering you. They're going to be like, where are those designs? Got to get them done, because then they got to get them to India, and India's got a program, and then they got to get them back to the client. And it was one of those things where there's always a limit where money makes it worth it. You know, this is a pretty common strategy. If somebody doesn't want a job, they throw out a huge number, and if they're willing to pay the huge number, you just kind of suck it up, and you're like, well, they're paying me a bunch of money, I guess I'll do it. So that was my deal. I said, hey, if you want to pay me this much to do the static designs, I'll do it, but otherwise it's not going to be worth it. Because the other lady who put me in contact with them, she said she was doing it for like $200 or something, and I was just like, you are getting ripped off, just absolutely. So yeah, something's always worth it, but I think it's really important to say no. I think that is a hugely underestimated word.
Take that one on?
Yeah. No, I didn't, because they didn't want to pay me what I was asking for.
Well, and that's also kind of a good anecdote from maybe a client side. If you have a freelancer or an agency that maybe agrees to what you already know is maybe a little bit of a low budget, it might mean that they don't have a lot going on client-wise, or maybe something, it could mean, if they're transparent, if they're communicative, just like Ashley said, it could mean that they're just really interested in working with you. So, don't look a gift horse in the mouth, but at the same time, could mean that maybe they're not busy for a reason.
Yeah. And I think that kind of underscores a good point, though, too. So if you're thinking about working with an agency or a freelancer, the budget should sort of determine when you work with an agency, you work with overhead, right? So you've got a building to pay rent on, you've got employees, you've got other software that you have to use to keep things running. There's additional overhead when you're working with an agency versus a freelancer. So when you're thinking about your own business needs, it's important to think about, okay, do I need a team? Do I need a team's expertise to make this happen? Or is this potentially I can have one or two freelancers take it on, work independently, and get me what I need? And sometimes you can save money there too, right? So while yes, sometimes the rate is so low that you realize, okay, probably the quality of work's not going to be great. But you can save if you know that you don't necessarily need a whole team to take on the project, because when you work with an agency, even if you're only working with a couple of people on that team, you have to sort of deal with that overhead when you go in, like with the rates that an agency might have versus a freelancer. So it's an important thing to think about, and can really make a big difference when you're thinking about your business needs. So.
Any other questions before I can jump into stories all day? So that's not a problem, but I'm just curious if any questions.
I could toss something out here, maybe like piggybacking off of that. Oh, now my mind's blanking out. I think it was something to the effect of how do you know, like if you're out looking for work, and you talked a little bit about this here, how do you know it's like, oh, do I need an agency to do this, or do I need the freelancer? Could you guys delve a little bit more into that kind of like perspective from the client side? And so like most of the people up here know what I do, but for everybody else, it's like I do a lot of video work, right? But like I focus primarily on video. I look at video as like being holistic in terms of like the way that I look at things, but I don't pretend that I'm an agency, right? And I do a lot of work with student employees, right? And so, it's like I don't try and pretend that I'm an agency. I tend to think of like, oh, an agency like tends to have like, say, a more holistic view of kind of like everything that you could be doing. And then maybe from the perspective of like, oh, I need video. Let's say, when would you go, like, say, to, you're freelancer, I need video, versus, oh, maybe I should go to the agency just for video or for the big picture. Could you like break that down a little bit?
Sure.
Or for not video? Is that useful to you? It sounds like you're shaking your head. It's a good question.
I can
No,
take
sure.
a stab at it. So, generally speaking, when I think about when a client comes to us, like, does it make sense for them to come to us or to go to a freelancer? I think there's generally two things that I usually see. So one is budget, right? Budget restrictions. If you've got, let's say less than $5,000 to spend on a website, you're probably going to want to go with a freelancer, because from an agency standpoint, to onboard you and to do all these things, that you're not going to necessarily get out of that relationship what you're hoping for. However, if you know that there is more in the pipeline, so let's say like, yes, I can only do a website right now, but I know that once I get, start making a little bit more revenue, I want to do more. I want to do email marketing. I want to do some social. I maybe want to do video later. Sometimes there's a case for establishing that relationship early on. If you know that that this is a small piece to a larger puzzle. But if it's a one-off thing that, you don't envision, you don't envision needing a lot of support either. Like, let's say you just want a site and kind of set it and forget it, and you don't envision doing a lot of updates. That might be something that a freelancer could take on, because if you do need updates, you don't have to have them on retainer, right? You can pay them ad hoc down the road, whereas with an agency, you might need to have them on retainer for them to come back and make updates. And so kind of thinking about not just the short term of what you need, like here and now, but what you might need later. So from a video perspective, I think that video is a little bit interesting when it comes to that sort of division of labor when it comes to agency or freelancer. But I do think that it's still kind of the same thing. Is this a one-time video need? Is this something that could be turned into more? Or is it something that video is just one piece of what will be a larger ecosystem of our marketing efforts? So that's generally how I look at it. And when we have clients come in or prospective clients that are just looking for sort of a one and done, we tend not to take on as many of those types of projects, because, again, the time to onboard somebody for a small project and sort of the overhead associated with it, even from an agency standpoint, doesn't make sense. But we have sort of a network of freelance partners or contract partners that we work with, and we say, hey, here are some people that you can absolutely go work with outside of the scope of the agency. We know they'll do a good job, and it'll better fit your needs. So again, we try to establish being a good partner up front, because then also we found that if they have people that they know that have larger needs, they're going to refer them back to us now, because they know that we are looking out for them versus just trying to churn things out.
I think that's a pretty perfect answer. There's two caveats I'd give. One is at least in our case, Ashley's agency that she works with out of the cities versus the agency that we are for OMG is maybe a little bit different in that we do a good amount of one and done type projects, because there's a lot of businesses that in the Mankato area at least have budgets that kind of require less recurring nature, right? So just from a more rural Mankato kind of standpoint, we do a little bit more of that, and just so that you're aware of that and can spread that out in the community. But number two, going back to the video question, Kurt, I think I completely still agree with that process point, but I think the thing for me, if I was on the client side, would be the quality or the style and tone, right? And there's certain things that are commoditized within marketing. I mean, graphic design, no offense, Mike, some graphic design can be kind of commoditized, right? It can be just here's a collateral piece. It's not really meant to do much anyways. It's just meant to communicate a pretty simple message for whatever purpose. But when you get into bigger things like logos and rebrands, or if you get into video especially, there's definitely a tone and a style to different agencies or freelancers. And I think that when you shop for that type of a service, you're probably going to want to take a really deep look at that. At least I would as a client, and I know that I did with the restaurant a little bit more. And so that would be my caveat there is, you know, if you're trying to decide between an agency and a freelancer for video, it might be better not to worry about who the business structure is or if it's an individual, but rather what does their portfolio look like? Do these people match my tone and voice that I want to reach?
The question too can like be really like, that's my perspective, but I think for the benefit of everybody here, it's like, that could be like for whatever perspective, piece of whatever medium you're looking at.
Yeah.
Oh,
So, we're a small nonprofit and we don't do enough with our social media stuff. You know, we'll make like a Facebook post a day kind of thing, but we don't do any paid advertising or anything like that. I think that it'd be really beneficial for us to start doing more of that, especially some of that targeted advertising that we were hearing about last month and stuff. Any advice on convincing your supervisor that that's kind of where society's headed and we need to start looking at some of that stuff?
Yeah. So buy-in is definitely important, right? And one of the things that I'll plug the Small Business Development Center for a second. So I do some consulting with the Small Business Development Center, and I can't tell you how often clients of all sizes come to us and ask for advice. And especially within marketing, I'll have a client that'll come and they'll ask for a marketing plan, and we'll sit down and we'll invest time and build something from a marketing plan standpoint. But maybe that client didn't really have buy-in, right? So that buy-in piece is important because I, as a consultant or an agency, or you as an employee of an organization, spend a lot of time on something, and if the rest of the organization hasn't bought in from the get-go, then you wasted that time, essentially. So that buy-in piece is really important. Everyone has a different metric or reason for why they do what they do. And so it's important to identify what is that pain point or what is it that individual wants to accomplish and try and address it from that tone. But I think there's some universalities to say that most of marketing is really moving into this more of two-way communication as opposed to just one way. So, you know, if we look at everything that's been done with television, radio, print, that's all one-way communication. You can't talk back, right? You have to pick up a different medium and start a conversation. But if you want to really have an in-depth conversation about how your nonprofit or business can help serve a specific community or raise money or why you should donate or whatever the purpose might be, there's not a lot of ways that are more effective than social media, and I think that that's one. Number two, you can track the effectiveness better than most platforms. You can specifically look on a weekly or monthly basis and say, I had a goal, I either reached that goal or I didn't. And you can attribute it directly to some of that social media. And so those would be the kind of the lead selling points from a metric or a sales standpoint that I would try and do. But I'd also just try and identify for that individual what is it that's most important to them, and how do I explain how social media can do that for them. So.
Yeah, and from a paid perspective, from a paid ad perspective, I think I see a couple things with clients on that side where, first of all, to get buy-in, I think it's important that just to look at the way that Google has continued to gain the share of is basically share of search, right? So Google is doing everything that they can to keep people on their listings. Excuse me. And they're rolling out new features every week that sort of continue to push people pay to play, right? Goodness. And so I think that has to be part of the conversation, is that this is where Google's moving to, and if we want to have any visibility, we're going to have to sort of play their game, which is sort of unfortunate, but is kind of how it is. But I do think that, to Wes's point, to go into it with a clear goal in mind, like this is what we hope to accomplish with paid search or paid media, and being clear about that up front, so that if you do start something, that it's not just like, oh, here went $5,000 this year on paid. What did we get from it? Because I see that a lot with clients. They want to do paid and they just say, hey, we want to do paid. And then when they get the metrics back, it's like, oh, well, I thought this would be higher, or this would be better. So I think establishing that early on is important, but also just knowing that that's where things are headed. And I think to make a couple things with paid as well is that to make an impact quickly, paid is one of your best options to kind of get out there, especially even for brand visibility or organizational visibility. It's a really straightforward way, we'll put it that way, to do it, but it's going to cost more than organic methods. So just being understanding of that up front is important, but paid also allows you to test your messaging or to test your position on things really quickly. So you can set a small budget and test things really quick. So I think depending on your business goals, it's paid can really support that as long as you understand what that sort of what those goals are. Paid can always sort of come in to support whatever they might be.
I would just echo Wes's sentiments to a degree, but more so that no other platform gives you any type of feedback whatsoever. I have a client that's a restaurant, and we probably twice a month get hit up by a radio advertiser, and it's like, hey, would you like to advertise your restaurant on the radio? And I just go, listen, you just, as soon as you can tell me that somebody heard my radio ad and it wasn't blasting to an empty room, like, if you could give me any way that I knew that this was having any impact whatsoever, I'd be happy to throw you a few bucks. And then they come in with they've got their own proprietary digital platforms or whatever, which are fine, but I think the user base is gigantic, and the fact that, like Ashley said, it's the quickest way to get your brand out there and seen. I can't even tell you how many, and maybe you as well can think of some, but just brands that you had never heard of before, and you just were scrolling through and an ad stopped in and you either clicked on it or you didn't, but now they're in your head. I'm thinking of like Mud Water. You ever heard of Mud Water? They're like a coffee alternative. And I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. Clicked on it. It was really expensive and it wasn't for me. So, but now, like, these guys were a startup, never heard of them, but now they're reaching, Mankato, Minnesota, and
See, they
New York.
clearly know their target demographic, because I would have never clicked on something called Mudwater.
But that's
he
what
clearly
intrigued
would've,
me. Yeah,
so-
right, exactly.
I just say for convincing like someone, if you're trying to convince someone why to use social, I think too, finding other organizations that are like your organization that are using it and say, hey, look at what they're doing, look at their success, and that's just another kind of using them as examples in your own space of, oh, they're doing it, look at all their engagement, and just kind of taking them at an example and just kind of learning from others that are doing it already. So
I would say too, kind of a picture's worth 1,000 words. If you do searches on Google for your organization, a lot of times now, all of the top 3 or 4 above the fold are all ads, but they've revamped the way that they look, so now they look like organic listings, and so people are that much more likely to click on those listings now. And so really what used to be, if you were in the top spot of organic, you still got 60% of click traffic, is now down to almost like 30%, so cut in half really from where it was even like 2 years ago. So from an organic standpoint, it's still beneficial, but it is very quickly becoming, even if you're in that number 1 position, you're still not getting a lot of the click share. So.
Oh, wait, I'm just going to say one more thing. I think knowing what social media is and paid ads is right for you as well. Because, if you're not an image-heavy or image-driven organization, Instagram won't be good. If you're a builder or a tradesperson, House is where you're going to want to be, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of figuring out where your audience lives and then going after that. Because people might not honestly be searching for whatever it is that you want to get in front of them on Google. They might be looking on Facebook.
Right.
So,
That's a good point.
Kurt?
I'm gonna take a wild guess and say that people who come to something where we're talking about how to work with an agency are probably at about the size where they might be thinking about, oh, maybe I could hire either a full-time or a part-time, or take somebody's like job description and we'll make it half now, marketing. Can you talk about can you talk a little bit, you see where I'm going here?
Yeah, I
It's like,
do.
do you do
So-
this?
Maybe the
Do
young
you
person,
go
they can do it.
establish a relationship with an
Yeah.
agency?
Yep. So from an agency standpoint, this was actually like a biz dev strategy for us. We were looking at how could we get business from people that are advertising marketing positions at businesses. But so there's a couple pieces to this. Number one, it's generally speaking, if you find a good candidate and a good fit for your organization, it's great to have people internal. And that's obviously not beneficial for me to say in some respects because it eliminates business, but great internal people are great. But when you're an organization that has a lot of different varying needs, it's hard to find one individual that can fit all of those needs. And so you see a lot of marketing departments of one that handle graphic design, copywriting, social media management, photography, videography, website management, paid advertising, whether it's radio or television, PR, the list goes on, right? And you can't expect one individual to have all those experiences, and if they do, you're probably paying them a sum that's quite large. And so that's where the freelancer piece, if you're still a bootstrapping organization, can make a lot of sense. You can find one main contact person that's either part-time or full-time if your budget allows it, and then put some of the rest of that team together via freelancers. Or if you're really concerned on a continuity of brand, or if you have a particular style that you're looking for and an agency makes sense, the agency route can definitely fulfill a ton of needs, because that's how most agencies, not all, but most agencies try and design themselves to have multiple services offered within their house. And so, that's one of the strategies that Mike and I realized very early on when we would get requests for websites and we tried to learn how to build websites. We went, this isn't a great strategy. We're not developing the right type of content for our clients. We're not doing a good enough job here. We need to go out and find people that know how to build websites. And that's essentially what you guys are doing as business or organizational leaders, is trying to do that same evaluation. And so that's where we've got people under one roof that we can all be on the same page. We all already have a good working rapport, and we can deliver a number of different products and services, all with that same type of continuity. So if you're weighing, should I hire someone, do a real needs evaluation. Can you get what you're looking for out of hiring one person? And is that truly feasible from a budget standpoint? If the answer is no or maybe, then it's probably worth looking into either grabbing a couple of freelancers that fill those needs, or an agency that can take care of a number of needs. So.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a tough question, and that is with what's going on in the news today, and the economy, and basically the challenges that we're going to face probably in the next few months. Do you foresee any changes or opportunities for marketing?
So I think that from you mean just general marketing perspective, I think that there are, in a lot of ways, people are going to want to maintain business as usual to an extent. But I think that from a marketing perspective, there's opportunity to find a way to be creative, to connect with people in different ways. And so I think that we'll see over the next probably 3 to 6 months a lot of creativity and a lot of different ways of doing things to make kind of the same impact. And so it's unfortunate what's going on, but I think we're always going to run into these things that happen over time. Every so often these things are going to happen. And so I think there's an opportunity for amazing creativity to come out of it. So.
Yeah, I would say it's still early, and this is the first time I've ever been through something like this. But I would say it's pretty obvious experiences are the things that are getting just punched in the mouth right whether it's concerts or events and everything, but also restaurants. As far as my family is concerned, we're very, conscious of the fact that people are not going to want to go out in crowds and put things in their, eat. They're not going to want to do these things that are probably going to open them up even more so to potentially contracting the virus. And so some of the initial conversations that are happening in some of the marketing groups that I'm a part of is people are pivoting to curbside delivery heavy. And some are only doing curbside delivery in preparation for the fact that this isn't going to be a couple weeks or a month. This is going to be months, because with the strategy that we're taking as a country, it's not going to go away quickly. It's going to take quite a while, and it's all going to be at kind of the same level. So that, from a strategy standpoint, I think the ones that are starting to put in some processes and plans are probably the ones that realize that they're in it for the long haul. I don't really know what the answer is for people that are exclusively experienced, that don't even have food as a component, performers and that type of stuff. That's going to be largely online, right? They're going to have to find their revenue elsewhere.
Virtual reality.
Yeah.
But I guess, virus aside, if we talk about the economics of it, at least the way that I am gauging it, it feels different, like than 2008, which, I'm a little bit older than Wes, but I was in college when that happened. It still didn't impact my life very, very much. But it feels like the desire and the enthusiasm for the economy to keep going is still there, but this is just kind of a crappy situation that we have to get through. Whereas 2008 was sort of a meltdown of our own making that dealt with a lot of very physical, tangible things like houses. So I think that, I think people will number one, still try and kind of continue business as usual and put money into marketing and kind of keep their business going. But two, I think that people will start to localize a little bit more as far as spending their money and working with people. I think, there's always shockwaves that happen when national corporations like this see a huge hit on their bottom lines or their stock prices, which is unfortunate. But, if we're looking at Mankato, I think we've got it pretty good around here, in my opinion. So I don't know if that answers the question at all, or if it was just, kind of a stream of consciousness thing. But I don't know. I think it's different. I just think it's different, and we're going to have a hard period. But I think like the enthusiasm for growth and development is still there, and I think we're all going to be okay.